A silent mansion becomes a scene of utter shock when a millionaire comes home early and finds something he could have never imagined. At his desk, a seemingly innocent detail reveals a secret with the power to destroy or rebuild an entire life. Suddenly, truths buried for years begin to surface, unleashing a battle between love, guilt, and power. And when the story finally takes a turn, no one is prepared for the twist that follows. Before you hear this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. The midday sun, filtered through the leafy canopies of the century-old trees that lined the mansion's entrance, cast dancing patterns on the impeccable asphalt of the private drive. Richard Miller, a real estate mogul whose fortune was as vast as his reputation for being ruthless in business, parked his luxury car with an almost reverent silence. The mansion, a monument of classic architecture and understated opulence, seemed to be sleeping under the warm heat of an ordinary Wednesday. He hadn't called ahead. It was a habit, a whim perhaps, to show up unannounced, expecting to find the usual silence, the house empty, awaiting his return. As he opened the main door, the echo of his footsteps on the polished marble was the only melody. The vast living room, with its imported furniture and priceless works of art, was immersed in the elegant gloom of the heavy curtains. Richard walked toward the kitchen, perhaps in search of coffee, a light snack before resuming his appointments. But as he crossed the threshold of the kitchen door, what he saw paralyzed him. It was not the silence he expected. It was not the solitude. At his dining table, a unique piece of solid oak imported from France and valued at a small fortune, sat 4 children. 4 boys, identical. Their small, round faces radiated a quiet joy as they devoured, with an almost moving eagerness, a plate of simple yellow rice. There was no luxury, no delicacies, just rice, served in ceramic bowls he had never seen before in his home. They were smiling with a disarming confidence, as if this were the most natural place in the world for them to be. Standing beside them was Anna, his young housekeeper. Her eyes, usually discreet and downcast, shone with a maternal tenderness as she guided their small hands, wiped a messy corner of her mouth, and whispered words Richard couldn't make out. She looked like a mother, a loving, dedicated mother, completely at ease in this bizarre setting. But what truly made Richard's heart run cold, what struck him with the force of a lightning bolt, was not the unexpected presence, nor the domestic scene that completely upended the order of his house. It was the recognition, the undeniable, brutal recognition that made him stagger. The 4 boys were living copies of himself, the same broad forehead, the same shape of the eyes, the same prominent chin. And then the final blow. One of the boys, the one closest to the head of the table, had a small purplish mark on the nape of his neck, a birthmark Richard knew well. It was his family's hereditary birthmark, present on his own neck, on his father's, on his grandfather's. The air seemed to thin in Richard's lungs. His voice, when he finally managed to force it out, sounded hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Anna, what is the meaning of this?" Anna, who until then hadn't noticed her employer's presence, jumped. The plate she was holding slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor with a deafening crash that made the boys flinch. Her eyes, once full of affection, were now wide with panic. Her face, once serene, turned pale. She visibly tried to formulate an excuse, a lie. "Mr. Miller, they're my nephews. They came to visit as a surprise." The lie, fragile and transparent, dissolved in the air. One of the boys, the same one with the birthmark, lifted his blue eyes, identical to Richard's, and stared at him without fear. His childish but firm voice cut through the tense silence of the kitchen. "Are you my daddy?" Reality crashed down on Richard like a final blow, a tsunami that dragged him into an abyss of memory and pain. He stumbled, leaning against the doorframe. The children, his children. He remembered the funeral 5 years earlier. The small sealed caskets, white and cold. The doctor's explanations, cold and technical, about complications during childbirth, about the fragility of premature quadruplets, the excruciating pain, the sense of loss that had consumed him for months. It had all been an act, a cruel farce. Anna, trembling with tears streaming down her face, could no longer sustain the charade. Mr. Miller, I swear I didn't know. I found them. They were—" Her voice broke, but the truth now was inevitable. Anna's confession came in bursts, between sobs and Richard's stunned gaze. She told him how, months earlier, while walking home after an exhausting day at the mansion, her eyes had been drawn to a strange movement near a dumpster behind a roadside diner. At first, she thought it was an animal, but as she got closer, what she saw made her blood run cold. 4 small figures, filthy and skeletal, were fighting a dog for scraps of food. It was the boys. They were starving, covered in dirt, with open sores and purple marks on their wrists and ankles, as if they had been tied up. Too weak to run, their large, frightened eyes pleaded for help. Anna, with her minimum wage and a heart too big for her chest, didn't think twice. She couldn't leave them there. She secretly brought them to the mansion, to the small room she had in the back of the property. In the days that followed, Anna's life became a web of secrets and sacrifices. She split her already meager salary to buy cheap rice and a few vegetables. She sewed makeshift clothes using old shirts Richard had discarded, turning them into garments that barely covered the boys' thin bodies. Every meal was an act of love and desperation, every night a silent prayer that no one would discover her little refuge. She knew the story sounded unbelievable, that Richard would never believe these were his sons, who had been declared dead. The fear of being fired, of being accused of something terrible, was constant, but her love for those children overcame any fear. Richard listened, his mind spinning, in a spiral of shock and disbelief. His sons, alive, abandoned. The image of the little ones fighting for food in a dumpster, the marks from being tied up, the hunger in their eyes, was a dagger in his chest. The pain of the loss he had felt 5 years ago resurfaced, but now mixed with a cold growing rage. Who could have done this? Who could have been capable of such cruelty? Before he could form the next question, the sound of a car stopping in the driveway and the familiar click of high heels on the marble announced a new presence. The kitchen door opened again, and there she was, Mrs. Eleanor Miller, the family matriarch, impeccable in her designer suit, with her usual haughty expression. She had come for their weekly lunch, a ritual that Richard, in his confusion, had completely forgotten. Her gaze swept the scene, the housekeeper in tears, Richard pale and in shock, and the 4 boys, now huddled and scared, at the dining table. A chill ran down Richard's spine. His mother's reaction was not one of surprise, but of an icy panic that she tried in vain to disguise. Her eyes, once commanding, now danced with an unspeakable terror. "What is this, Richard? What is this circus in my house?" Eleanor's voice was a whip, but Richard caught the note of desperation behind the fury. "Your house? Mum, what is going on here? Who are these children?" Richard demanded, his voice thick with emotion and the suspicion that was beginning to form in his mind. Eleanor tried to maintain her composure, but the steel facade was beginning to crumble. They're the housekeeper's children, Richard. She brought them here without permission. What an outrage! I'm firing her this instant." But the lie couldn't hold. The panic in her eyes was too obvious. Richard moved closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Mom, one of them has the family birthmark. The same one I have. The same one Dad had. Tell me the truth, now." Pressed, cornered, Eleanor finally let it slip. The words came out like poison, a cruel confession that echoed in the kitchen. "I paid them. I paid the doctors. I paid the unlicensed orphanage to declare the children dead and dispose of them. 4 premature babies, Richard. A disgrace. A burden that would have ruined the family legacy. Don't you understand? I did it to protect you, to protect our name." The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. His own mother, the woman who raised him, who always preached morals and good values, had orchestrated the farce, had condemned her own grandchildren to a life of neglect and misery. The confrontation exploded. The air in the kitchen grew thick, heavy, with a palpable tension. Eleanor's words hung like a toxic cloud, suffocating any remnant of affection Richard might have held for her. The image of the small white caskets, the searing pain that had consumed him, all reconfigured in his mind, transforming into an icy fury. He looked at the boys, huddled and frightened, and then at Anna, who was now crying silently, terrified. "Protect the family name." Richard's voice was a dangerous whisper, more frightening than any shout. "You condemned them to death, Mum. You condemned my sons to abandonment, to starvation. Is that protecting the family name?" Eleanor, blinded by her own conviction and the panic of her secret being exposed, didn't back down. Her eyes flashed. "They were an aberration. 4 at once. Premature. They would have been a burden, Richard, a scandal. I did what was necessary to maintain the dignity of our lineage." The matriarch, in a fit of rage, lunged toward Anna, her fingers clawed as if to attack her. "You little rat! How dare you bring these things into my house? You will pay for this!" But before she could reach Anna, one of the boys, the same one with the birthmark who had instinctively stood in front of the housekeeper, was grazed by Eleanor's arm. It wasn't a hard blow, but it was enough to unbalance him and make him fall, hitting his head lightly on the floor. A small whimper of pain escaped his lips. That was the limit. The last thread of Richard's patience snapped. The sight of his son, his own blood, hurt by his own grandmother, unleashed a fury he never imagined he possessed. "Enough!" Richard's shout echoed through the mansion, making the crystal chandeliers tremble. "Get out of my house, Mom, now, and don't you dare come back, ever again!" Eleanor stopped, stunned. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Her eyes widened, her fury giving way to a wounded disbelief. "Richard, are you throwing me out because of this woman and these bastards? They are my sons, and Anna is the woman who saved them. You, Mom, are the aberration here. Get out, before I drag you out myself." The matriarch, humiliated and furious, shot a look of hatred at Richard and Anna, and then at the boys. "You will regret this, Richard. You have no idea who you're messing with. I will destroy this woman, and these brats will go back to the hole they came from." With those venomous words, she turned and stormed out of the kitchen, her footsteps echoing angrily through the mansion until the sound of the front door slamming shut. Richard knelt beside his son, examining the small forehead. There was no serious injury, just a bump beginning to form. The boy, scared but brave, looked at him with the same blue eyes that had questioned him minutes before. Richard hugged him tightly, an awkward embrace, but one filled with an overwhelming emotion. "It's okay, son. Daddy's here now," he whispered, the words strange and new in his mouth, but carrying a profound truth. Anna, still in shock, watched the scene. She knew Eleanor's fury would not be empty. The threat to destroy her and make the boys go back to the hole was real. The matriarch had power, influence, and above all a relentless hatred. Little did they know that while Richard was trying to comfort his newfound sons, Eleanor was already in her car, phone to her ear spewing her venom. The kidnapping report was already being filed, and the bureaucratic machine, driven by the vengeance of a woman whose pride had been wounded, was beginning to move. The police and social services were on their way. The chaos was just beginning. Richard's embrace of his sons was a mixture of relief, guilt, and a silent promise. He held them close, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, the scent of childhood, and, underneath it all, the lingering aroma of the yellow rice Anna had served them. That scent, once insignificant, was now seared into his memory as the aroma of salvation. Anna, still in tears, watched the scene, her heart torn between fear of what was to come and the joy of seeing these boys she loved so much in their father's arms. The calm, however, was short-lived. The sound of sirens ripped through the afternoon silence, rapidly approaching the mansion. Richard and Anna exchanged a panicked look. Eleanor had wasted no time. Minutes later, police cruisers and an unmarked car from Child Protective Services pulled into the driveway. Uniformed officers and a social worker with a serious expression entered the mansion, led by a security guard who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Richard Miller?" asked the social worker, a middle-aged woman with a tired but determined look. "We've received a report of child abduction. A Ms. Anna Hayes is being accused of illegally keeping these children in her custody." Richard stood in front of Anna and the boys who were now clinging to the housekeeper's legs, frightened by the presence of strangers. "This is a mistake. These are my sons, and Anna saved them from a situation of neglect. The social worker raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, Mr. Miller, the allegation is serious. Mrs. Eleanor Miller claims that the employee kidnapped the children and kept them hidden. We need to take them to a temporary shelter while we investigate the situation and paternity. Richard's heart froze. Take his sons? To a shelter? After everything they had been through? He couldn't allow it. No! You are not taking my sons anywhere, Richard exclaimed, his voice filled with desperation. I am their father, I can prove it. Do a DNA test, right now. One of the police officers stepped forward. Mr. Miller, we understand your position, but the law is clear. Without documented proof of paternity and in the face of a kidnapping allegation, the children must be protected. Ms. Anna Hayes will have to come with us to give a statement. Anna, her eyes welling up, held the boys tighter. Please don't take them. They've suffered so much already. I swear I did nothing wrong. I just wanted to protect them. The boys began to cry, panic etched on their faces. The thought of being separated from Anna, the only mother figure they had ever known, was unbearable. Richard felt the floor give way beneath him. The impersonal, bureaucratic system was threatening to rip his sons from his arms again and take the woman who had saved them to jail. He had to act, and fast. He needed a final, desperate move, but one that could protect them all. His eyes met Anna's. In that moment of desperation, a bold, almost insane idea formed in his mind, an idea that would change all of their lives forever. I have a solution, Richard declared, his voice firm, surprising everyone, including himself. I'm going to marry Anna. Now. Immediately. A shocked silence fell over the room. The social worker and the police officers looked at each other, confused. Anna stared at him, incredulous, the tears drying on her cheeks. Mr. Miller, this isn't a game, the social worker said, visibly annoyed. It's not a game, Richard retorted, looking directly at Anna. Anna, will you marry me to protect our children, so that you'll have legal protection as their mother? Anna, still in shock but seeing the determination in Richard's eyes and the urgency of the situation, nodded slowly, a thread of hope emerging from the despair. Yes, Mr. Miller, I will. Perfect. Richard turned to the officers. By marrying, Anna becomes my wife and legally the mother of my children. The kidnapping charge loses its basis, and custody of the children will automatically be mine, and hers. We can do it in the library, right now. I have a friend who's a justice of the peace who can be here in minutes. The social worker considered it for a moment. The proposal was unusual but legally plausible. An immediate marriage, even under such dramatic circumstances, would alter Anna's legal status, and consequently, the children's situation. Very well, Mr. Miller, she finally said with a sigh. If the marriage is performed and paternity is confirmed by DNA, the kidnapping report will be dismissed and the children will remain in your custody. But the DNA test is non-negotiable. Richard nodded, feeling a momentary sense of relief. He had bought them time, he had found a loophole. The ceremony would happen in a rush, in the library, with the 4 boys, as witnesses. The life of Richard Miller, the solitary mogul, was about to change irrevocably. The library of the Miller mansion, a sanctuary of knowledge and silence, had never witnessed a scene like this. Antique and rare books, which Richard collected with fervor, seemed to watch curious as the drama unfolded. The Justice of the Peace, a long-time friend of Richard's, arrived in record time, visibly intrigued by the urgency of the call, but discreet enough not to ask questions. Anna, still in her simple work clothes, her face marked by tears and fear, stood beside Richard. He had swapped his suit jacket for a more comfortable shirt, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. The 4 boys, now calmer but still apprehensive, sat on a leather sofa, their eyes fixed on the adults, trying to understand what was happening. They were the most important witnesses to this unusual wedding. The ceremony was brief, devoid of any pomp or romance, but charged with a profound meaning. The words of the Justice of the Peace echoed in the room, sealing a commitment born of necessity, but one that already carried the weight of a promise of protection and an uncertain future. When Richard and Anna said "I do," their voices sounded firm, a pact of loyalty and union forged under pressure. At the end, the justice of the peace, with a discreet smile, declared them husband and wife. Richard looked at Anna, and for the first time he saw in her not just the housekeeper who saved his sons, but the woman who now shared his destiny, his family. He held her hand, a simple gesture, but one that conveyed a security Anna hadn't felt in a long time. The officers and the social worker who had watched the scene with a mixture of skepticism and surprise acknowledged the validity of the act. The kidnapping report had indeed lost its power. However, the question of paternity still hung in the air. "Mr. Miller, the DNA test is still mandatory," the social worker reiterated. "We need biological confirmation to close the case definitively and ensure the children's safety." Richard nodded. "I understand. We can do it right now. I have a trusted medical team that can come to the mansion." A few hours later, DNA samples were collected from Richard and the 4 boys. The wait for the results was agonizing. Every minute felt like an eternity, as Richard tried to calm his sons who were still confused and scared. Anna, now his wife, remained by his side, a pillar of silent strength. When the sealed envelope finally arrived, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Richard opened it with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the lines of the report, and a deep sigh of relief escaped his lips. "Positive," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "They're my sons, my 4 biological sons." The news brought immediate relief, but also a new wave of pain. The unquestionable confirmation of paternity reinforced the cruelty of what Eleanor had done. The social worker, upon seeing the results, declared the case closed, with custody of the children legally established with Richard and Anna. The officers left, leaving behind a mansion that, in just a few hours, had witnessed a drama worthy of a Greek tragedy and a shotgun wedding from a twisted fairy tale. But the story didn't end there. Richard's curiosity, now that paternity was confirmed, pushed him to dig deeper. He wanted to know the extent of his mother's cruelty. With his contacts and resources, he accessed secret files, documents that revealed the depth of Eleanor's plot. The records were shocking. Not only had she paid to have the babies declared dead, but she had also arranged for them to be taken to an illegal group home with clear instructions that they be raised with the bare minimum. No adoption, no education, no chance of a decent future. The goal was for them to simply disappear from the world, to become forgotten statistics, so that the family legacy would remain untarnished. Richard's rage was immense, but a new clarity also washed over him. Exposing his mother, bringing her to justice, would be a scandal that would tarnish not only her name, but also his sons. They had already suffered enough. True justice, he realized, would not be revenge, but rebuilding. With a radical decision, Richard gathered all the documents, all the records, all the proof of his mother's cruelty. He took them to the library fireplace, the same one where he had been married hours before. One by one, he threw them into the flames, watching them turn to ash. He chose to turn the page. The real justice would be giving his sons a happy life, far from their grandmother's shadow, far from the pain of the past. But before he could begin to rebuild the future, the phone rang. It was the hospital, the final call. His mother. The shrill ring of the phone cut through the heavy silence of the library, where the last embers of the burned documents still glowed. Richard answered, his heart already tight with a premonition. The voice on the other end, formal and hurried, confirmed his worst fears. His mother, Eleanor, had been in a serious car accident. She was at the hospital in critical condition. The news paradoxically brought neither the relief one might expect, nor the satisfaction of revenge. Only a void. Richard, accompanied by Anna, who insisted on going with him, drove to the hospital in a somber silence. The image of his sons, now safe in their rooms, but still marked by trauma, hung in his mind. Upon arrival, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed through the hallways. Eleanor was in an emergency room, surrounded by machines that beeped incessantly. Her body, once so proud and impeccable, now lay fragile and broken, connected to tubes and wires. The doctor on duty, with a grave expression, informed Richard that his mother's condition was irreversible. She had tried to force her way back into the mansion, likely in a fit of rage and desperation, and in her haste had lost control of her car on the winding curve of the driveway. The vehicle was completely destroyed. Richard approached the bed, Anna discreetly by his side. Eleanor, her eyes half open, seemed to be struggling to breathe. Her voice, a hoarse and almost inaudible whisper, tried to make itself heard. "Richard, I did it to protect the family name." There was no remorse in her words, only the same cruel justification that had guided her entire life. She, until her last breath, believed she had acted correctly. Richard looked at her, without tears, without forgiveness. The pain she had caused, the wound she had opened in his life, and in the lives of his sons, was too deep to be healed by a late and selfish apology. He did not cry. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply ended the cycle of pain she had created right there. With a nod to the doctor, he turned and left the room, Anna following him in silence. Eleanor's death, though tragic, represented the end of an era, the closing of a dark chapter. Upon returning to the mansion, the atmosphere felt different. The cold, imposing silence that once dominated the halls had been replaced by a new energy. Small, colorful toys were beginning to appear in the corners. Children's drawings, still timid, adorned the walls of the boys' room. And coming from the kitchen, a familiar smell, yellow rice. No longer the rice of poverty, but the rice of victory, of hope, of rebuilding. Richard watched Anna in the kitchen, preparing the meal for the boys. She was no longer the frightened housekeeper, but his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who had rescued his family. He approached, and together they served dinner. From that moment on, the Miller mansion changed its soul. Silence gave way to laughter, to games, to little feet running through the corridors. Richard, the ruthless mogul, began to learn how to be a father. It was a challenge. The boys, though safe, carried deep traumas. Nightmares, irrational fears, difficulty trusting. Richard and Anna spent sleepless nights calming the little ones, facing the ghosts of abandonment. He read stories, she sang lullabies. Together they rebuilt their son's trust, brick by brick, night after night. Anna, with her infinite patience and unconditional love, was the compass that guided Richard on this new journey. She taught him how to be a father, how to love in a way he never imagined possible. A year passed. The mansion, once a symbol of his loneliness, now pulsed with life. On a sunny spring day, a party in the garden celebrated the boy's birthday. They ran across the lawn, healthy, strong, their eyes shining with happiness. Richard watched them, a genuine smile on his face. Anna, wearing a floral apron, served a large platter of the old golden rice, now enriched with fresh vegetables and a touch of saffron, a dish that had become the symbol of their new life. She served it with a radiant smile, her eyes meeting Richard's. In that moment, Richard understood. On that day he arrived unannounced, expecting to find his mansion empty, and couldn't believe what he saw. He hadn't found a problem. He had found the treasure he had been searching for his entire life, his real family. And beside Anna, he knew the journey was just beginning. The garden party was a whirlwind of colors and sounds. Balloons floated, children laughed, and soft music filled the air. Richard watched his sons, now 6 years old, running barefoot through the grass, their faces smeared with cake and joy overflowing from every pore. The little one with the birthmark, who now went by the name of Daniel, was the most adventurous, leading his brothers on an impromptu treasure hunt. Peter, the most thoughtful, sat under a tree, flipping through a storybook. Lucas and Gabriel, the other two, were racing a remote-control car with inexhaustible energy. Anna, his wife, moved gracefully. Among the guests, a constant smile on her lips. She had transformed. The scared, submissive housekeeper had given way to a confident, radiant woman who radiated a serene strength. Her eyes, once always downcast, now met Richard's with a deep complicity, a silent understanding that only time and trials could forge. The mansion, once a mausoleum of luxury, was now a home. The walls, once untouchable, proudly displayed children's drawings, some crooked, others brilliant, but all full of life. The smell of yellow rice, which once represented poverty and survival, now mingled with the aroma of freshly baked cakes and garden flowers, a perfume of happiness and abundance. Richard, who once dedicated every minute of his life to business, had rediscovered the value of time. Endless meetings were replaced by afternoons at the park, business trips by weekends at the beach with his family. He learned how to soothe nightmares, how to patch up scraped knees, how to answer a million childish questions with patience and affection. With every daddy he heard, his heart filled with an emotion that money could never buy. The rebuilding, however, was not easy. The boy's traumas ran deep. Daniel, the bravest, had inexplicable outbursts of anger. Peter, the calmest, suffered from anxiety and fear of abandonment. Lucas and Gabriel, though more adaptable, had difficulty expressing themselves, preferring silence. Richard and Anna sought professional help, child therapists who guided them through the healing process. The sessions were long and painful, but with every small breakthrough, every genuine smile, every spontaneous hug, they knew they were on the right path. Anna, with her innate wisdom, was the family's anchor. She understood the boys' fears in a way that Richard, with all his intelligence, could not. She taught them to trust, to love, to feel safe. She taught them that the yellow rice, which was once their only source of sustenance, was now a symbol of their resilience, of their ability to overcome adversity. Richard, for his part, dedicated himself to creating an environment of safety and stability. He invested in education, in healthcare, in everything his sons had been deprived of. Every night before they went to sleep, he visited each of their rooms, kissed their foreheads, and whispered words of love and protection. He was determined to erase the dark memories of the past with a bright future. As he watched the party, Richard felt Anna's hand in his. She smiled, and he knew she shared the same feeling. That day a year ago, when he arrived unannounced and found his sons, had been the turning point of his life. He had lost a mother, but gained a family. He had lost his loneliness, but found love. Life in the Miller mansion was now a testament to the human capacity for overcoming, for unconditional love, and for the strength of a family that, against all odds, had found its way to happiness. The yellow rice, served on a silver platter, was more than food. It was the celebration of a new life, a new beginning, a treasure worth more than all the fortunes in the world. Richard looked at Anna, his eyes welling up. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She just squeezed his hand, a smile that was worth 1,000 words. The journey had been arduous, but every step was worth it. The Miller family, now complete, was ready to face whatever the future held together. The boys' birthday party stretched into the evening, the mansion illuminated by soft lights, and the air still vibrating with childish joy. After the guests had departed, Richard and Anna, exhausted but with overflowing hearts, put their sons to bed. The little ones, asleep before their heads even hit the pillow, were living proof of the new reality that inhabited the house. That night, while Anna tidied up the kitchen, Richard sat in the library, the silence filled only by the soft crackle of the fireplace. He picked up an old photo album, one of the few that had survived his convinced bachelor phase. He flipped through the pages, seeing himself at different stages of his life. An ambitious young man, a successful businessman, a lonely man. The photos with his mother, Eleanor, were few and formal, always with a polite smile, never a spontaneous hug. The absence of a father in his own life, a man who was always distant and focused on business, had shaped Richard in a way he was only now beginning to understand. He had replicated the model, seeking in his work the validation he never found at home. The wealth, the power, the reputation, it was all armor to hide the loneliness. Anna entered the library, sitting beside him on the sofa. She said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of silent comfort. "I never knew what it was like to have a real family, Anna," Richard confessed, his voice low. "My mother. She always prioritized image, legacy. Love was a currency, conditional on success. My father was absent. I grew up believing that love was something you earned, not something you received unconditionally." Anna looked at him tenderly. "I know, Richard, but you're learning, and they're teaching you. Their love is pure, without conditions. It's the greatest treasure you could ever have." He closed the album, the memories of the past mingling with the hope for the future. "I still wonder how I could have been so blind, how I didn't see what my mother was capable of." A mother's love can be blind, Richard, and power sometimes corrupts even the strongest. She believed she was doing what was best for you in her own way. A twisted, cruel way, but she believed it. Richard shook his head. "There's no justification for what she did, but I've chosen not to live in its shadow. I've chosen to build something new, something real." He turned to Anna, taking her hands. "You gave me that, Anna. You gave me a family. You taught me what real love is. I was a rich man, but I was empty. Now I'm a whole man." Anna smiled, her eyes shining. "We gave it to each other, Richard, together. And the boys, they are our greatest wealth." The conversation stretched into the night, revealing layers of their lives that were still untouched. Anna told him about her humble childhood, the struggle to survive, the hope for a better future. She had never dreamed of a life like this, married to a millionaire living in a mansion. Her dream was simple: to have a home, a family, and the ability to care for those she loved. Richard, in turn, opened his heart about the pressures of the business world, the loneliness at the top, the constant search for more that never filled the void. He realized that for years he had been looking for happiness in all the wrong places. That night, the connection between them deepened. It was no longer just a marriage of convenience forced by circumstances. It was a marriage of souls, built on a foundation of gratitude, respect, and a love that grew with each passing day, nurtured by the presence of the 4 little miracles sleeping in the rooms next door. The mansion, once a stage for drama, was now a sanctuary for family. The past, with its pain and revelations, had been overcome. The future, with its challenges and joys, was just beginning. And Richard, the millionaire who once didn't know what love was now certain he had found his true treasure. The months that followed were a period of intense and gratifying adjustment. Richard, with Anna's tireless help, dove headfirst into fatherhood. Board meetings were now interspersed with calls to the school to check on the boys' performance, or to the therapist to discuss their progress. He learned to distinguish a cry of hunger from a cry for attention, to assemble complex puzzles, and the patience required to explain the same thing for the 10th time. Anna, for her part, blossomed in her new role. She was no longer the housekeeper, but the lady of the house, the matriarch of a family she had literally rescued. Her simplicity and common sense were the perfect counterpoint to the complexity of Richard's world. She brought a lightness and warmth to the mansion that luxury could never provide. The kitchen, once a sterile and professional environment, became the heart of the home, where Anna taught the boys to bake cookies and told stories while preparing dinner. The boys, Daniel, Peter, Lucas, and Gabriel, responded to the love and security with surprising speed. The nightmares lessened, the angry outbursts became rarer, and trust began to flourish. Daniel, the natural leader, now channeled his energy into more constructive games, organizing his brothers in imaginary adventures through the vast mansion garden. Peter, the intellectual, spent hours in the library, reading the children's books Richard had provided and surprising everyone with his insightful questions. Lucas and Gabriel, once more withdrawn, began to express themselves through art, filling the house with colorful drawings and clay sculptures. Despite the happiness, the past still cast its shadows. Richard knew that although he had burned the proof of his mother's cruelty, the story couldn't be completely erased. There was a risk that one day someone would discover the truth about what Eleanor had done. He prepared for that day, strengthening family bonds and building a solid foundation of love and trust. One day, as Richard was working in his office, Anna came in with a worried expression. "Richard, the school called. It seems one of the parents of Daniel's classmates asked some strange questions about our family." Richard felt a chill. "What kind of questions, Anna?" He asked if the boys were adopted, if they were real brothers, and mentioned he'd heard some rumors about Richard Miller's new family. The news was a reminder that the outside world still existed and that curiosity and judgment were inevitable. Richard knew that his mother's story, though suppressed, could resurface at any moment. He had chosen to protect his sons from the brutal truth about their grandmother. But how? Could he protect them from the whispers and curious glances? He stood up, walked to the window, and watched the boys playing in the garden. They were so innocent, so pure. He didn't want the shadow of their grandmother's past to touch them. "Anna, we need to be proactive," Richard said, turning to her. "We can't let the story be told by others. We need to tell our own story, in our own way." Anna looked at him, understanding the gravity of the situation. "But how? What will we tell them and the world?" "We'll tell the boys the truth, but in a way they can understand when the time is right. As for the world, we'll show them that we are a family, a strong and united family, and that love is what defines us, not blood or the past." Richard's decision was risky. Exposing the truth, even in a controlled way, could bring up old wounds. But he knew that transparency, within the limits of protecting his children, was the only way to build a truly solid future. He didn't want his sons to live with secrets, with the feeling that there was something to hide. The first step would be to talk to the boys. Not about their grandmother's cruelty, but about the story of how they found each other, how Anna saved them, and how love united them. It would be a story of overcoming, of resilience, of a love that transcends the barriers of blood and social conventions. Richard knew the journey would be long and full of challenges, but with Anna by his side and the love of his sons, he was ready to face anything. The Miller mansion, now a beacon of hope, was ready to tell its new story to the world. The conversation with the boys wasn't easy. Richard and Anna chose a late afternoon as the sun was setting, painting the sky in orange hues over the mansion's garden. They sat on the lawn in a circle, with the four boys nestled between them. The atmosphere was one of affection and security, but tension hung in the air. Richard began, his voice soft, choosing his words carefully. "My sons, you know that Daddy and Mommy love you very much, right?" Four little heads nodded in unison. "And you know that we're a very special family, different from many others," Anna continued, taking Daniel's hand, who seemed the most restless. "Our story is a story of great love and a magical meeting." Richard took a deep breath. "A few years ago, before you came to live here, Daddy didn't know he had sons. I lived alone in this big house, and I felt like something was missing. One day, Mommy Anna found you. You needed help, and she, with the huge heart she has, took care of you. She brought you here, to this house, and gave you all the love and care you needed." Peter, the most perceptive, looked up. "But why did we need help, Daddy? Where were you?" The question hit Richard like a dart. He looked at Anna, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Daddy didn't know where you were, my son. There was a big mistake, a very big mix-up, and you were in a place where you shouldn't have been, without the care you deserved. Mommy Anna was an angel that God sent to find you and bring you back to me." He avoided mentioning their grandmother, the cruelty, the abandonment. That would be too much for their young minds. The story needed to be story, retold as a modern fairy tale, where the hero and heroine united to rescue the lost princes. "And when Daddy saw you for the first time, I knew you were my sons. I felt it in my heart. And from that day on, I promised that you would never be alone again, that you would have all the love and security you deserve." Lucas, the most sensitive, hugged Anna tightly. "So, Mommy Anna saved us." "Yes, my love," Anna answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Mommy Anna saved you, and Daddy Richard saved all of us by giving you a home and a family." Gabriel, who had been silent until then, asked, "And are we going to stay here forever?" Richard smiled, pulling all four into a tight hug. "Forever, my loves. This is your home, this is your family, and no one, ever again, will separate you from us." The conversation ended with hugs and the promise that they were loved and safe. Richard and Anna knew this was just the first of many conversations. The harder questions would come with time as they grew and began to understand the complexities of the world. But for now, the seed of truth, tempered with love and protection, had been planted. The next step was dealing with the outside world. Richard decided the best way to combat the rumors was with the truth, but a carefully crafted truth. He organized a charity event at the mansion, a benefit gala for an organization supporting vulnerable children. It would be the perfect opportunity to introduce his new family to his social circle. The news of Richard Miller's marriage to his housekeeper had already circulated in the halls of high society, generating whispers and speculation. Many saw Anna with disdain, as an opportunist, others with curiosity. Richard was determined to change that perception. On the day of the event, the mansion was stunning. The guests, the cream of society, arrived in their luxury cars. Richard, impeccable in his tuxedo, stood beside Anna, who wore an elegant but understated dress he had chosen for her. She was nervous, but Richard held her hand, giving her confidence. When it was time for the speech, Richard took the makeshift stage in the main ballroom. All eyes were on him. He began by talking about the importance of charity, of social responsibility. And then, with a smile, he paused. "Tonight, I'm not just here as a businessman, but as a man who has found true wealth. A little over a year ago, my life changed completely. I discovered I had 4 wonderful sons who had been separated from me by tragic circumstances. And I discovered the woman who saved them, who brought them back to me, and who today is my wife and the mother of my children." He gestured to Anna, who approached, holding the hand of each of the boys, who were dressed in small tuxedos, looking at the crowd with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. "These are Daniel, Peter, Lucas, and Gabriel, my sons, and this is Anna, my wife. Our story is proof that love can arise in the most unexpected places, and that family is built on bonds that go beyond blood. It's built with love, with sacrifice, with the courage to fight for those we love." A murmur went through the crowd, some looks of surprise, others of admiration. Richard had turned the tables. He had transformed a story of scandal into a story of love and overcoming. From that day on, the Miller family would not be defined by rumors, but by the strength of their love. Richard's speech at the charity gala was a turning point. The initial reaction from high society was shock, followed by a wave of admiration. Richard's courage in sharing his story, in presenting his family so authentically and passionately, disarmed the critics and silenced the gossipers. The story of love and overcoming, with Anna as the unlikely heroine, quickly spread, transforming the public perception of the Miller family. Anna, once viewed with disdain, was now admired. Her simplicity and dignity, combined with her story of rescuing the boys, elevated her to a new status. She became an example of strength and unconditional love. The doors of society, once closed to the former housekeeper, now opened with respect and genuine curiosity. The boys, in turn, were met with affection and curiosity. Their rescue story, told gently and heroically by Richard, turned them into little symbols of hope. They began attending a prestigious school where, despite some initial questions, they were quickly integrated and accepted by their peers. Life at the Miller mansion found a new rhythm. Richard and Anna dedicated themselves to creating an environment of love, security, and learning for their sons. Mornings were filled with the buzz of the boys getting ready for school, afternoons with homework and games in the garden, and evenings with bedtime stories and family dinners, where the yellow rice, now a gourmet dish, was served with pride. Richard, however, knew that this peace was fragile. Eleanor's absence had left a void, but also a sense of relief. Yet, he couldn't ignore the fact that she had accomplices. The doctors, the illegal group home, the people who had participated in the farce. He had burned the evidence to protect his sons from a scandal, but justice in its broadest sense had not yet been served. One day, while reviewing some of his mother's old documents, Richard found a small journal hidden in a secret compartment of her desk. It was a notebook with dates, names, and some codes he couldn't immediately decipher. Curiosity drove him to investigate. With the help of a trusted private investigator, Richard began to unravel the codes. What he discovered was a scheme far more complex than he had imagined. Eleanor had not only paid to have the babies declared dead, but had also created a network of contacts to ensure they remained invisible to the system. The illegal group home was just one piece of a larger puzzle that involved corrupt doctors, dishonest public officials, and even a small charity foundation that served as a front to embezzle funds and keep the children in precarious conditions. Richard's anger flared again. He had promised himself he wouldn't seek revenge, that he would focus on his son's future, but the extent of his mother's cruelty, the way she had manipulated lives and destroyed futures, was something he couldn't ignore. He couldn't allow other children to suffer the same fate. He spoke with Anna, explaining what he had discovered. She listened attentively, her eyes filled with sadness and indignation. "Richard, you burned the evidence to protect our sons. But what about the other children? What about the other families who might have been victims of this scheme?" Anna's question echoed in his mind. He had chosen peace for his family, but at what cost? He had become an accomplice by omission to a corrupt system that continued to operate. "You're right, Anna," Richard said, his voice firm. "I can't ignore this. I have to do something. But I'll do it in a way that doesn't expose our sons, that doesn't traumatize them again." The decision was made. Richard, with the help of his investigator and a trusted legal team, began to gather evidence discreetly. He didn't want a public scandal, but he wanted to dismantle the network of corruption his mother had created. He wanted to ensure that no other child was disposed of, as his sons had been. The fight would be long and dangerous. He would be up against powerful and unscrupulous people. But Richard was no longer alone. He had Anna by his side and the love of his sons as his greatest motivation. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about punishing the past, but about protecting the future, and he was determined to do whatever it took to ensure that the future of his sons, and of many other children, was safe and happy. Richard's investigation unfolded in the shadows, far from the media spotlight and public curiosity. He acted with the same precision and discretion that had made him a successful mogul, but now with a much more personal and moral purpose. The private investigator, a former cop with an enviable network of contacts, was crucial in unraveling the intricacies of the corruption ring. Eleanor's journal, with its coded notes, proved to be a goldmine. With the help of cryptography experts, Richard and his team managed to decipher the codes, revealing names, dates, and payment amounts. The scheme was vast and intricate, involving not only the illegal group home, but also fertility clinics, private hospitals, and even county clerk offices. With each new discovery, Richard's outrage grew. He found that his mother had not only orchestrated the disappearance of her own grandchildren, but had also facilitated child trafficking, the sale of babies, and the forgery of documents for families seeking illegal adoptions. The family legacy she so cherished was, in fact, built on a foundation of crime and inhumanity. Anna, though worried about the risks Richard was taking, supported him unconditionally. She understood the need for justice, not for revenge, but to protect other children. Her life experience, her humility, and her clear vision of right and wrong were a guide for Richard, who sometimes found himself tempted to use his own, less orthodox methods to speed up the process. "Richard, we need to be careful," Anna warned him one day as he reviewed a stack of documents. "We can't become like them. Justice needs to be served cleanly, so that no one can question your integrity." Anna's words resonated with Richard. He knew she was right. The temptation to use his power and influence to crush his enemies was great, but he couldn't stoop to their level. The fight was for justice, not for power. Richard's legal team, led by a renowned and ethical lawyer, began to build the case. They worked in secret, collecting testimonies, analyzing documents, and constructing a robust dossier. The goal was not just to imprison the culprits, but to dismantle the entire network, ensuring it could never operate again. The first target was the illegal group home. Richard, in disguise, visited the location. What he saw shocked him to his core. Children living in unsanitary conditions, without education, without affection, waiting to be disposed of or sold. The image of his own sons, fighting for food by a dumpster, resurfaced in his mind with overwhelming force. He could wait no longer. With the evidence in hand, Richard contacted the authorities. The operation was meticulously planned to ensure the children's safety and the arrest of those involved. The police and child protective services acted together, rescuing dozens of children and arresting the people responsible for the group home. The news of the children's rescue and the takedown of the child trafficking ring exploded in the media. Richard Miller's name, once associated only with business success, was now synonymous with heroism and social justice. However, he made sure to keep his involvement discreet, crediting the success of the operation to the authorities and the investigative team. He didn't want the spotlight on himself or on his family. Despite the success of the operation, Richard knew the battle was far from over. The network was vast, and many of those involved were still at large. He also knew that the exposure of the case could eventually bring his mother's involvement to light, and consequently the story of his sons. He prepared for that moment, strengthening his family bonds and ensuring his sons were emotionally ready to face any adversity. The truth, he knew, was a powerful weapon, but also a double-edged sword. He had to use it wisely, protecting those he loved while seeking justice for those who had no voice. The Miller mansion, now a refuge of peace and love, was also the headquarters of a silent but relentless fight. Richard, the mogul who once sought only profit, now dedicated his fortune and his intelligence to a greater cause, the protection of children and the pursuit of a more just world. And by his side, Anna, his wife, his partner, his moral compass, guided him on this journey. The takedown of the illegal group home was just the beginning. Richard's investigation, now with the covert support of the authorities, advanced on other fronts. With each piece of the puzzle that fell into place, the picture of the corruption network became clearer and more frightening. Renowned doctors, influential lawyers, and even some politicians were involved, all protected by a web of silence and complicity. Richard, with his legal team, began to prepare the lawsuits. He didn't just want to punish the guilty, but also to reform the system, ensuring that adoption laws were more transparent and that vulnerable children were truly protected. He knew this would be a long and grueling battle, but he was determined to fight to the end. Anna, by his side, was his greatest strength. She constantly reminded him of the purpose of his fight. Not revenge, but justice and the protection of the innocent. She helped him keep his feet on the ground, not to get lost in the complexity of the legal and political world. Her presence was a constant reminder of the love and hope he was defending. The boys, oblivious to the complexity of their parents' struggle, were thriving. Daniel, the leader, excelled in sports, showing boundless energy. Peter, the intellectual, spent hours in the library, devouring books and developing a precocious talent for music. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, filled the house with their creations, turning every corner into a children's art gallery. Richard and Anna strived to maintain normalcy in their lives, shielding their sons from the gravity of the investigation. They wanted the boys' childhood to be filled with joy and security, not the weight of the past. However, the truth, as always, found a way. One day, Peter, the most observant, found an old newspaper clipping in Richard's drawer. It was a story about the rescue of the children from the illegal group home. The article, though it didn't mention Richard directly, spoke of the courage of an anonymous benefactor who had uncovered the scheme. Peter, his curiosity piqued, brought the clipping to Richard. "Daddy, who is this benefactor? And why doesn't he want people to know who he is?" Richard felt a chill. It was the moment he had been dreading. He sat down with Peter and with the other boys who joined in, drawn by the seriousness of the conversation. "My sons," Richard began, his voice soft, "the anonymous benefactor is me. And I didn't want people to know because this is a very delicate story involving very powerful and dangerous people." He then, with Anna's help, began to explain in a simplified way the corruption network. He talked about how some people, driven by greed, had taken advantage of defenseless children. He talked about the importance of fighting for what is right, of protecting the weak. Peter, with his intelligent eyes, asked, "And Grandma Eleanor, Daddy? Was she involved in this?" Peter's question was a blow. Richard and Anna looked at each other. It was time to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "Yes, my son," Richard answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Grandma Eleanor, unfortunately, was involved. She made a very serious mistake, a mistake that caused a lot of pain. She believed she was protecting the family, but she ended up hurting many people, including you." He didn't go into details about the abandonment, about the sealed caskets, only that she had made a grave mistake. "But was she sorry, Daddy?" asked Lucas, with the innocence of a child. Richard hesitated. She didn't have time to be sorry, my love. She was gone before she could understand the gravity of her actions. But the important thing is that we are here now, together, and we will make sure that no one else goes through what you went through. The revelation about their grandmother was a shock to the boys. They had grown up with the image of a distant grandmother, but not a villain. The news left them sad, confused, but the love and security that Richard and Anna offered them was a balm for their wounds. That night, Richard and Anna spent hours talking with the boys, answering their questions, calming their fears. They explained that love is stronger than hate, that justice prevails, and that above all, they were loved unconditionally. The truth, though painful, brought a new layer of understanding and unity to the family. The boys, now aware of the world's complexity, became more resilient, more conscious of the importance of fighting for what is right. Richard knew the journey was still long. The fight against the corruption network continued, and healing the wounds of the past was an ongoing process. But seeing his sons, strong and loved, he knew he was on the right path. The Miller family, now more united than ever, was ready to face whatever the future held. The revelation about Grandma Eleanor, though painful, did not shake the foundation of the Miller family. On the contrary, it seemed to strengthen the bonds between Richard, Anna, and the boys. They understood that the world was complex, that people could make grave mistakes, but that love and truth were the pillars that held up their home. Richard and Anna, with the help of child therapists, continued to guide the boys through the process of understanding and healing, ensuring the truth was digested in a healthy way. The fight against the corruption network, on the other hand, intensified. Richard, with his legal team and private investigator, had gathered irrefutable evidence against several influential individuals. The strategy was to attack on multiple fronts, ensuring the network was dismantled systemically, not just with the arrest of a few pawns. The first major step was the formal indictment against the doctors and staff of the illegal group home. The evidence was overwhelming: fraudulent financial records, testimonies from repentant former employees, and most importantly, the statements of the rescued children who, though young, could describe the squalid conditions and mistreatment. The media, which was already following the case of the anonymous benefactor, exploded with the news. The names of those involved began to be released, and the scandal spread. Richard, however, remained behind the scenes, protecting his identity and that of his family. He didn't want media attention to distract from the real issue, justice for the children. Despite his discretion, the pressure on Richard mounted. Those involved in the network, feeling cornered, began to fight back. Veiled threats, bribery attempts, and even sabotage at some of his companies began to occur. Richard knew he was poking a hornet's nest, and that his life, and his family's, was at risk. Anna, sensing the growing tension, reinforced security at the mansion. She insisted that Richard hire more guards and that the boys be accompanied at all times. The fear was real, but Richard's determination was greater. "We can't back down now, Anna," he told her one night as he reviewed security reports. "Too many lives depend on this. If I stop, they win, and I can't let that happen." Anna hugged him, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders. "I know, my love, but promise me you'll be careful, that you'll think of us, of the boys." "I think of you every second," he replied, kissing her forehead. "You are my reason for fighting." Richard's fight was not just against corruption, but also against time. He knew that sooner or later his mother's connection to the scheme would come to light, and consequently the story of his sons. He needed to be prepared for that moment, and ensure that the truth was presented in a way that protected the boy's image. He began working on a communication plan with the help of a trusted public relations firm. The idea was to get ahead of the attacks, controlling the narrative and presenting his son's story as a testament to overcoming adversity, not as a scandal. Meanwhile, life at the mansion continued its course. The boys, with the innocence of childhood, continued to fill the house with joy. They were a constant reminder of what Richard was fighting for. He watched them play, laugh, grow, and felt an immense gratitude for having them in his life. One day, Daniel, the oldest, asked Richard, "Daddy, why do you work so much? Don't you like playing with us?" Richard knelt, hugging his son. "I love playing with you, my love, but Daddy is working to help other children so they can also have a family and a safe home, just like you do. It's very important work." Daniel looked at him with admiration. "So you're a superhero, Daddy?" Richard smiled, his heart warmed. "Maybe, but Daddy has a superheroine by his side, Mommy Anna, who is the bravest of all." Richard's fight was a journey of self-discovery. He was learning that true strength was not in power or wealth, but in the ability to love, to protect, and to fight for what is right. And alongside his family, he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. Justice, he knew, would be a long and arduous process, but the reward, the safety and happiness of his sons, was worth every sacrifice. The legal and media battle intensified. With Richard's whistleblowing, several prominent names in society began to be investigated. The press, thirsty for scandal, dove headfirst into the story, and the case of the anonymous benefactor dismantling a child trafficking ring became a national headline. Richard, however, remained firm in his decision to protect his identity and that of his family, carefully controlling the information that was released. Despite his efforts, the truth, like an underground river, always finds a crack to surface. An investigative journalist with a keen nose for big stories began to connect the dots. He discovered the link between the illegal group home and the Miller family, and, more specifically, Eleanor's involvement. From there, it was a small step to uncovering the story of the quadruplets who had died at birth. The news exploded like a bombshell. The headline screamed, "Mogul Richard Miller's sons declared dead in child trafficking scheme," orchestrated by their own grandmother. The story, once a well-kept secret, was now exposed to the world. Richard and Anna had prepared for this moment, but the intensity of the exposure was overwhelming. The Miller mansion was surrounded by journalists, photographers, and onlookers. The phone rang off the hook, and social media buzzed with comments and speculation. The Hauber boys, who had already been told about their grandmother's involvement, were the most affected. They were bombarded with questions at school, with curious stares, and sometimes with the innocent cruelty of other children repeating what they heard at home. Daniel, the most extroverted, began to withdraw. Peter, the thinker, questioned everything. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, expressed their confusion in dark drawings. Richard and Anna redoubled their efforts to protect them. They spoke with the school, asking for support and discretion. They spent more time with the boys, explaining the situation, reaffirming their love and the importance of their unity. The child therapist became a constant presence at the mansion, helping the boys process the flood of information and emotions. "Daddy, why are people talking about us?" Peter asked, his eyes welling with tears. "Why do they want to know about Grandma Eleanor?" Richard hugged him tightly. "Because your story is very important, my son. It's a story of overcoming, of love. And people need to know that even in the most difficult situations, love always wins." He knew the words were a temporary comfort. The pain of the exposure was real. But he also knew that the truth, however, painful, was the path to healing. Despite the media chaos, Richard did not back down from his fight. The exposure of his son's story, though painful, served to give even more strength to his cause. Public opinion, once divided, was now largely in his favor. The story of Richard Miller's quadruplets became a symbol of the fight against corruption and child trafficking. With pressure from the media and public opinion, the investigations moved forward quickly. More arrests were made, more names were revealed. The corruption network, once so powerful and untouchable, began to crumble. Richard, however, felt the weight of the battle. The nights were short, the days exhausting. He found himself constantly torn between the fight for justice and the need to protect his family. Anna, sensing his exhaustion, became his safe harbor even more. She reminded him to breathe, to eat, to allow himself a moment of rest. "You're not alone in this, Richard," she told him one night as he watched the boys sleep. "We're a team, and together we'll get through this." Anna's presence, her quiet strength, was what kept him going. She was the compass that guided him, the constant reminder of what truly mattered. The mansion, despite the media siege, remained a refuge of love and security. Richard knew the battle wasn't over yet. The legal proceedings would be long and drawn out, but he also knew he had built a strong, resilient family, capable of facing any adversity. His son's story, once a painful secret, was now a testament of hope, and he was determined to ensure that this story had a happy ending. The media storm, though intense, began to subside, giving way to a period of relative calm. The story of the Miller quadruplets and the corruption network that had ensnared them continued to make news, but the intensity waned, allowing the family to breathe. Richard and Anna used this time to focus on the boys' emotional recovery and the consolidation of their new life. The legal proceedings, however, continued their course. Lawyers, prosecutors, and judges worked tirelessly to uncover every detail of the child trafficking ring. Richard, though not appearing publicly, was a driving force behind the investigations, providing resources, information, and his vast network of contacts. With each conviction, with each piece of the network that was dismantled, Richard felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction at seeing justice served, sadness at the extent of human evil he had discovered. He dedicated himself to creating a foundation to support child victims of trafficking and abandonment, ensuring his fight would have a lasting impact. Anna, for her part, became the director of the foundation. Her life experience, her compassion, and her ability to connect with children were invaluable. She transformed the foundation into a home of hope, where traumatized children found psychological support, education, and above all, love. The boys, now 7 years old, were adjusting well to the new reality. Therapy had helped them process the trauma of the past and deal with the media exposure. They became more resilient, more aware of the importance of their story and their parents' role in the fight for justice. Daniel, the leader, channeled his energy into the foundation, organizing drives to collect toys and clothes for the children. Peter, the intellectual, wrote short plays and stories to be performed at the foundation, using art as a form of healing. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, decorated the foundation's spaces with their colorful drawings, turning gray spaces into vibrant and welcoming environments. The Miller mansion, once a symbol of luxury and power, was now a center of love and purpose. The boys' laughter echoed through the hallways, mingling with the smell of yellow rice, which had become everyone's favorite dish. Richard and Anna together had built not just a family, but a legacy of compassion and justice. One day, as Richard and Anna were having dinner, Peter, with his usual perceptiveness, asked, "Daddy, did Grandma Eleanor know you were going to fight for these children?" Richard and Anna looked at each other. The question was profound and revealed the maturity Peter had acquired. "I don't know, my son," Richard answered thoughtfully. "Grandma, Eleanor had a very particular view of the world. She believed she was protecting the family, but she ended up hurting many people. I believe that, deep down, she wanted what was best for you, but she lost her way." Anna added, "The important thing, Peter, is that Daddy chose a different path. He chose to fight for what is right, even if it meant going against what Grandma Eleanor believed. And he did it out of love for you, and out of love for all the children who need help." Peter nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. The truth, he realized, was complex, but his parents' love was simple and unconditional. Richard's fight against the corruption network lasted another 2 years. They were years of legal battles, veiled threats, moments of despair, and celebrated victories. In the end, the network was completely dismantled, and many of those involved were convicted. Anna and Richard's foundation became a national benchmark in supporting child victims of trafficking and abandonment. Richard, the ruthless mogul, had transformed into a man of purpose. He had found a greater meaning for his life, a legacy that went beyond money and power. He had learned that true wealth was not in bank accounts, but in the hearts of his family and the lives he had touched. Anna, his wife, his partner, his soulmate, was living proof that love can blossom in the most unexpected places and transform lives. Together, they had built a strong, resilient family that had overcome adversity and emerged stronger than ever. The Miller mansion, once a symbol of loneliness and luxury, was now a beacon of hope, a home where love, justice, and compassion reigned. And the four boys, Daniel, Peter, Lucas, and Gabriel, were living proof that even in the deepest shadows, the light of love always finds a way to shine. 2 years after the complete dismantling of the corruption network, life at the Miller mansion had reached a serene equilibrium. The boys, now 9 years old, were pre-teens, each developing their own personality and passions. Daniel, with his natural leadership, excelled in sports and already dreamed of being captain of the school's soccer team. Peter, the intellectual, delved into books on philosophy and science, questioning the world around him with surprising depth. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, continued to express their emotions through painting and music, filling the house with their vibrant creations. The foundation under Anna's direction thrived. It became a model of excellence in the care and reintegration of vulnerable children. Anna, with her sensitivity and vision, had created an environment where every child felt loved, safe, and valued. Richard, as chairman of the board, provided financial and strategic support, but it was Anna who gave the project its soul. The story of the Miller family, though still remembered, had transformed into a testament of overcoming. Richard and Anna, with the help of professionals, had worked tirelessly to ensure the boys understood their past without letting it define them. They learned that resilience was a strength, and that love was the greatest weapon of all. However, life, like a river, always finds new paths and brings new surprises. One day, as Anna was reviewing the Foundation's files, she came across a case that touched her deeply. A girl, about 8 years old, had been rescued from a situation of extreme neglect. Her large, frightened eyes reminded Anna of her own sons when she first found them. The girl, named Sophia after the grandmother who had abandoned her, had a particularly sad story. She had been discarded by her biological family shortly after birth, handed over to an illegal group home, one that Richard had helped dismantle, and then sold to a family who exploited her for domestic labor. Anna felt an immediate connection with little Sophia. She spent hours with the girl, listening to her stories, calming her fears. Gradually, Sophia began to blossom, revealing an intelligence and sweetness that had been suffocated by pain. Anna spoke to Richard about Sophia. "Richard, this girl, she reminds me so much of our boys. She needs a home, a family. She needs love." Richard, who had witnessed the transformation of his own sons, knew the power of love and security. He visited Sophia at the Foundation and saw her interact with the boys, who welcomed her with affection and curiosity. Daniel, the leader, included her in their games. Peter, the thinker, read stories to her. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, invited her to paint and draw. The decision was unanimous. The Miller family, which had been built on a foundation of love and overcoming, was ready to expand. Richard and Anna began the process of adopting Sophia. Sophia's arrival at the Miller mansion was a new chapter in the family's story. The boys, who had experienced abandonment and rejection, became the protectors of their new sister. They taught her how to play, to laugh, to trust. Sophia, in turn, brought a new joy and a new perspective to the house. The mansion, once filled with the energy of 4 boys, now vibrated with the sweetness and delicacy of a girl. The smell of yellow rice, which had become the family's symbol, was now prepared with a special touch for Sophia, who devoured it with the same eagerness the boys had shown years before. Richard and Anna watched their children interact, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. They had found happiness in an unexpected place, built a family from the ashes of a tragedy. The adoption of Sophia was proof that love had no limits, that family was not defined by blood, but by the bonds of the heart. Life at the Miller mansion was a living testament that even in the greatest adversities, hope and love always find a way to flourish. The family, now with 5 children, was complete, and Richard, the mogul who once sought material wealth, had found his true fortune in his family, in his home, in his legacy of love and compassion. Sophia's arrival at the Miller mansion brought a new dynamic, a new sparkle to everyone's eyes. The girl, once withdrawn and frightened, blossomed under the unconditional love of Richard and Anna and the warm welcome of her brothers. She became the little princess of the house, spoiled just enough but also taught the values of resilience and compassion that permeated the family. The years passed, and the Miller mansion continued to be a beacon of hope and a vibrant home. The 5 children grew up, each following their own path, but always connected by the unbreakable bonds that united them. Daniel, the natural leader, pursued a military career, becoming a respected officer, known for his integrity and courage. He applied the principles of justice and protection he learned from Richard in his professional life, defending the weak and fighting for a more just world. Peter, the intellectual, became a renowned university professor and researcher, dedicating his life to the study of child psychology and the traumas of abandonment. His research and publications helped shape new public policies for vulnerable children, honoring the memory of his own journey. Lucas and Gabriel, the artists, followed distinct but complementary paths. Lucas became an acclaimed painter whose works depicted the beauty of human resilience and the strength of family love. Gabriel, for his part, dedicated himself to music, composing melodies that touched the soul and conveyed messages of hope and overcoming. Together they created an art therapy foundation, using artistic expression as a healing tool for traumatized children. Sophia, the youngest, grew up with the sweetness and strength that characterized her. She graduated from law school, becoming a lawyer specializing in the rights of children and adolescents. Her passion was to fight against the injustices she herself had suffered, ensuring that no other child went through what she and her brothers had. She became a powerful voice for the voiceless, a tireless advocate for childhood. Richard and Anna watched their children with immense pride. The mansion, once too large for a lonely man, was now too small for the amount of love, laughter, and achievements it housed. The walls, once adorned only with expensive works of art, now displayed family photos, diplomas, medals, and drawings that told the story of a full and meaningful life. The foundation, under Anna's leadership and with the support of her children, grew exponentially, becoming one of the largest and most respected child support institutions in the country. The yellow rice, which was once a symbol of poverty, became the main course at the foundation's benefit events, a constant reminder of humble origins and the strength of overcoming. Richard, now an elderly man but with the sparkle of a young lover in his eyes, spent his days at the foundation, mentoring, advising, and sharing his wisdom. He had retired from business, dedicating himself entirely to philanthropy. His fortune, once accumulated for himself, was now used to transform lives. One late afternoon, Richard and Anna were sitting in the mansion's garden watching the sunset. Their grandchildren, Daniel's and Peter's children, ran across the lawn, filling the air with their laughter. Sophia, Lucas, and Gabriel were nearby, talking and laughing. "Who would have thought, Anna?" Richard said, holding her wrinkled hand. "That day when I arrived unannounced and found you and the boys, I couldn't believe what I saw. But it was the best day of my life." Anna smiled, her eyes welling up. "I couldn't believe it either, Richard. I thought it was the end, but it was the beginning of our family, of our story." They looked at each other, a deep and unshakable love overflowing in their gazes. Life had given them a second chance, an opportunity to build something beautiful from the ashes of a tragedy. They had proven that love, compassion, and resilience were the true riches of life. The story of Richard and Anna and their 5 children became a legend, a modern fairy tale that inspired generations. A story that began with a dark secret and an act of cruelty, but blossomed into a legacy of love, justice, and hope. And the Miller mansion, once a symbol of loneliness, was now the beating heart of an extraordinary family, an eternal testament to the transformative power of love. The years turned into decades. The Miller mansion, a silent witness to so many transformations, was now a matriarchy and patriarchy of love and memories. Richard and Anna, with their white hair and slower steps, continued to be the foundation of the family, the source of wisdom and affection for children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren who were beginning to appear. The foundation, which Anna had started with such care, grew exponentially, becoming an internationally renowned institution. Their children, each in their own field, actively contributed to the legacy. Daniel, after his military career, took over the security and logistics of the Foundation's operations in conflict zones. Peter, with his brilliant mind, developed innovative educational programs for traumatized children. Lucas and Gabriel, through art and music, created expressive therapies that helped heal invisible wounds. And Sophia, the lawyer, led the Foundation's legal team, fighting tirelessly for fairer laws and the protection of children's rights worldwide. The Miller family was a living example of how love can transcend blood and adversity. Family gatherings at the mansion were grand events, with generations mingling, laughter echoing through the gardens and the smell of yellow rice, prepared by Anna with the same recipe as always, filling the air. It was a constant reminder of where they came from and the path they had traveled. Richard, in his final years, spent most of his time in the library, his private sanctuary. He flipped through photo albums, reliving every moment, every challenge, every victory. The image of Eleanor, his mother, still occasionally came to his mind, but now devoid of anger or resentment. He had understood that although her actions had been cruel, his mother's story had also been a catalyst for the extraordinary life he and Anna had built. Anna, his eternal companion, sat beside him, reading or knitting, her hand always ready to find his. They didn't need many words. The silence between them was filled with decades of love, respect, and complicity. One day, as the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Richard felt a deep peace. He looked at Anna, who was watching him with a serene smile. "Anna," he whispered, his voice weak but full of emotion, "I found the treasure, the real treasure." Anna squeezed his hand. "Yes, my love, we found it." Richard closed his eyes, a soft smile on his lips. He had arrived unannounced years ago and found an emptiness. But Anna and the boys had filled that void with a life that surpassed all his dreams. He was gone, but his legacy of love and compassion would live on forever. Richard's death was a moment of deep sadness for the family, but also of celebration. He had lived a full, redeemed life and left an indelible impact on the world. His funeral was a testament to his journey, with hundreds of people he had touched, directly or indirectly paying their last respects. Anna, with the strength that had always characterized her, continued to lead the family and the Foundation. She was the matriarch, the guardian of Richard's memory and the values they had built together. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, ensuring that their legacy continued to flourish. The Miller mansion, now a symbol of resilience and unconditional love, continued to be the family's meeting point. New generations grew up hearing the story of Richard and Anna, the story of the quadruplets and Sophia, the story of how love can turn pain into hope, tragedy into triumph. And at every family gathering, with every plate of yellow rice served, the memory of Richard Miller and his extraordinary journey was celebrated. He had arrived unannounced, found what he didn't expect, and built a legacy that transcended time, proving that the greatest treasure in life is not what one accumulates, but what one loves and builds with the heart. The story of the Miller family was not just a narrative of overcoming, but a hymn to the human capacity to love, forgive, and rebuild. An eternal reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the light of hope always finds a way to shine, guided by the unwavering strength of love. Decades passed since Richard's departure. The Miller mansion, now a historical and cultural landmark, continued to be the beating heart of the family, a living museum of memories and a center of activities for the Miller Foundation. Anna, in her 90s, was still the matriarch, a revered figure whose eyes, though marked by time, still shone with the same compassion and wisdom as always. The Miller Foundation, under the leadership of the second and third generations, had expanded globally. Its programs for the protection and reintegration of vulnerable children were benchmarks worldwide. Daniel, Peter, Lucas, Gabriel, and Sophia, now grandparents and great-grandparents, dedicated their lives to perpetuating their parents' legacy, ensuring that the flame of hope and justice remained lit. Family gatherings at the mansion were legendary. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren of all ages and backgrounds came together to celebrate life, love, and the history that united them. The smell of yellow rice prepared with Anna's original recipe was an invitation to memory, a link to the past that shaped the present. At one of these gatherings, Anna, sitting in her favorite armchair in the library, surrounded by her descendants, began to tell the story once more. Not the story of Richard's businesses, nor that of the foundation, but the story of how it all began. The story of the day Richard arrived unannounced. "I was in the kitchen making lunch for the boys," she began, her voice soft but firm. "They were playing in the yard, as always. Life was hard, but we managed. And then the gate opened. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren listened with fascination, even those who already knew the story by heart. It was a family legend, a modern fairy tale that reminded them of their roots. And Richard came in," she continued, a nostalgic smile on her lips. "He was a big, imposing man, with a look that seemed to see right through you. I thought it was the end. I thought he was going to take the boys away, that I was going to lose everything." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of her descendants. "But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new life, of a new family. He saw the boys, and I saw in his eyes the same love I felt, and on that day I knew our lives would never be the same." She told them about the hasty wedding, about the fight against the corruption network, about adopting Sophia. She told them about the challenges, the pains, the victories. She told them about the love that grew between her and Richard, a love that transcended social barriers and expectations. At the end of the story, one of the great-grandchildren, a girl with curious eyes, asked, "Grandma Anna, was Grandpa Richard a prince?" Anna smiled, her eyes shining. "He was more than a prince, my dear. He was a man who learned to love, and that to me is the greatest treasure of all." The story of Richard and Anna and their 5 children became a legacy that transcended generations. It was not just a story of overcoming, but a testament to the transformative power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the ability to build a better future from the ashes of the past. The Miller mansion, with its walls that had witnessed so much, continued to be a symbol, no longer of luxury and power, but of love, family, and hope. And in every corner of the house, in every child's laugh, in every plate of yellow rice, the memory of Richard, the man who arrived unannounced, and of Anna, the woman who taught him to love, lived on forever. And so, the narrative of the Miller family concludes, not with a period, but with an invitation to reflect. A story that reminds us that life is an unpredictable journey, full of twists and surprises, that love can arise in the most unexpected places, and that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in the connections we build, the lives we touch, and the legacy of love we leave for future generations. The story of the Miller family, though officially concluded in its 20th chapter, echoed through time, reverberating in every life it touched. The mansion, now a center of memory and a beacon of inspiration, continued to be the stage for new stories, new beginnings, always with the spirit of Richard and Anna guiding their steps. The Miller Foundation, under the leadership of the 3rd and 4th generations, had become an empire of compassion. Its programs not only protected children at risk, but also promoted education, mental health, and the development of entire communities. Anna's philosophy that every child deserves love and a chance was the cornerstone of every project. Richard's vision of using resources and influence for the greater good drove innovation and expansion. The descendants of the 5 siblings, Daniel, Peter, Lucas, Gabriel, and Sophia, carried the legacy with pride and responsibility. Among them were doctors who dedicated their lives to caring for underprivileged children, educators who developed inclusive teaching methods, artists who used their art to raise awareness, and lawyers who fought for social justice. The diversity of talents and passions was a reflection of the richness of their own history. On a particularly significant day, Anna's 100th birthday, the Miller mansion was more vibrant than ever. Generations of the family gathered, along with countless friends, foundation collaborators, and people whose lives had been transformed by the family's work. Anna, sitting in her wheelchair, with a serene smile and eyes full of life, was the center of attention. Her children, now elderly but still full of vigor, took turns telling stories. Daniel, with his deep authoritative voice, recalled the first adventures in the mansion, the sense of security Richard and Anna had provided. Peter, with his academic eloquence, spoke about the importance of education and knowledge in overcoming trauma. Lucas and Gabriel, with the sensitivity of artists, presented a song and a painting that honored their parents' journey. Sophia, the lawyer, moved everyone to tears as she spoke about Anna and Richard's tireless fight for justice, and how that fight had shaped her own life. But the most touching moment of the celebration was when one of Anna's great-grandchildren, a 10-year-old boy named Richard, in honor of his great-grandfather, approached her with a plate of yellow rice. "Grandma Anna," he said, his eyes shining. "I made the yellow rice just like you taught me. It's for you." Anna took the plate, her eyes welling up. The familiar smell transported her back in time, to the humble kitchen where it all began, to the days of struggle and hope. She tasted a spoonful, and a genuine smile spread across her face. "It's perfect, my dear," she whispered. "Exactly how Grandpa Richard liked it." In that moment, everyone in the room felt Richard's presence, not as an absence, but as a continuous force, a love that transcended life and death. The story of the Miller family was not just about the past. It was about the present and the future, about the ability to love, to forgive, and to build a better world, one act of kindness at a time. Anna, looking at all the faces around her, her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends, collaborators, realized that the true treasure was not the mansion, nor the fortune, nor even the foundation. The true treasure was the family she and Richard had built, the legacy of love and compassion they had sown, which continued to flourish through the generations. Life at the Miller mansion and the spirit of the family would go on. The walls would witness new laughter, new tears, new achievements. The yellow rice would continue to be served, a reminder that even from the humblest origins, love can build an empire. And the story of Richard and Anna, the man who arrived unannounced and the woman who taught him to love, would be told and retold, inspiring everyone to seek the true treasure of life: unconditional love and the courage to fight for a more just world. The celebration of Anna's centenary was a milestone, not just for the Miller family, but for the foundation itself. The image of Anna, surrounded by her descendants and by those whose lives she and Richard had touched, became a symbol of hope and resilience. The family's story, told and retold, inspired new generations to embrace the cause of social justice and child protection. After Anna's passing a few years later, the Miller Mansion was transformed into a center of memory and an interactive museum open to the public. Each room told a part of the family's story, from the humble kitchen where Anna prepared the yellow rice, to the library where Richard planned his business strategies and later his campaigns for justice. Photographs, documents, personal objects, and video testimonies brought the extraordinary journey of Richard and Anna to life. The Miller Foundation, now under the leadership of Sophia, the youngest, and her children, continued to expand its reach. Sophia, with her passion for justice and her legal expertise, ensured that the foundation not only offered support but also advocated for systemic changes in child protection laws and policies. She became a global voice, defending the rights of children in international forums and inspiring governments to act. The other siblings, though older, remained active. Daniel, with his security experience, created a protection program for children in conflict zones. Peter, with his brilliant mind, developed innovative educational curricula for traumatized children, which were implemented in schools and care centers worldwide. Lucas and Gabriel, through their art and music foundations, brought healing and creative expression to children in hospitals and shelters. The Miller family, now a constellation of talents and passions, was a living testament to the power of love and resilience. The new generations, raised under the shadow of Richard and Anna's legacy, grew up with a deep sense of purpose and social responsibility. They understood that the family's fortune was not just financial, but a social and moral capital that should be invested in the well-being of humanity. One of the Miller Foundation's most ambitious projects was the creation of a village of hope, a self-sustaining complex that offered housing, education, healthcare and development opportunities for vulnerable children and youth. The village was built on land that Richard had acquired years earlier, with a vision of a future where no child would be abandoned. The Village of Hope was a microcosm of Richard and Anna's vision. The houses were designed to be homes, not institutions. The schools offered a holistic education that valued intellect as much as creativity and emotional intelligence. The health centers provided state-of-the-art medical and psychological care. And the heart of the village was a large community kitchen, where yellow rice was served daily, a constant reminder of humble origins and the strength of overcoming. On a sunny day during the inauguration of the Village of Hope, Sophia, now a mature and respected woman, addressed an emotional crowd. "My parents, Richard and Anna Miller, taught us that love has no limits, that family is not defined by blood but by the bonds of the heart. They taught us that, even in the greatest adversities, hope always finds a way to flourish. This village is the materialization of their dream, a place where every child can find a home, a family, and the chance to build a bright future." She paused, her eyes welling up. "They taught us that the true treasure of life is not what one accumulates, but what one loves and builds with the heart. And today, seeing this village, I know that their legacy will live on forever, through every child who finds a home, a family, and the hope of a better future here." The story of the Miller family, which began with a dark secret and an act of cruelty, had transformed into an epic of love, resilience, and redemption. The mansion, the foundation, the village, all were a testament that even in the deepest shadows, the light of love always finds a way to shine, guided by the unwavering strength of family. And so, the narrative of the Miller family continues, no longer in chapters, but in every life that is touched, in every child's smile, in every act of kindness that echoes through time, an eternal legacy of love and hope. The Village of Hope prospered, becoming a beacon of light in a world that still struggled against the shadows of injustice. The children who grew up there, many with stories of pain and abandonment, similar to those of the Miller siblings, found a refuge, a home, and the promise of a future. The Miller Mansion, now a museum and memorial center, received visitors from all over the world who came to learn about the extraordinary saga of Richard and Anna. However, life, even in its most serene course, holds unexpected twists. Years after the inauguration of the Village of Hope, an event shook the tranquility that the Miller family had built with so much effort. A new and dangerous child trafficking ring, even more sophisticated and cruel than the previous one, began to operate in the shadows, threatening to dismantle all the work of the Miller Foundation. Sophia, the lawyer, now a prominent figure in the fight for children's rights, felt the weight of responsibility. History was repeating itself, but this time she and her siblings were on the front lines. The threat was real, and the criminals' methods were brutal, aimed at silencing anyone who opposed them. The Miller family united, again just like in the old days. Daniel, though retired, brought his expertise in security and strategy. Peter, with his analytical mind, helped unravel the patterns of the new network. Lucas and Gabriel used their artistic influence to create awareness campaigns that shocked the world. But the leadership, passion, and determination came from Sophia, who saw in every threatened child a reflection of herself and her brothers. The battle was arduous, more dangerous than any Richard had faced. The criminal network was ruthless, and Sophia's life and her family's were constantly threatened. There were moments of despair, of paralyzing fear, where the shadow of the past seemed to want to swallow the future. In one of these critical moments, when the foundation was under attack and Sophia's life was in imminent danger, she found herself alone in the old library of the mansion, the same place where Richard had unraveled his mother's secrets. She looked at the portrait of Richard and Anna, their eyes fixed on hers. She felt their presence, the strength they transmitted to her. "Dad, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What do I do? How can we win this?" And then, like an echo, from the past, she remembered Anna's words, "Love is the greatest weapon of all," and Richard's actions. "We can't back down now. Too many lives depend on this." Sophia lifted her head, a new determination in her eyes. She was not alone. She had a family, a legacy, and the strength of a love that had overcome all adversities. She knew what she had to do. With a bold strategy and the unwavering support of her family and the vast network of the Miller Foundation, Sophia launched a counterattack. She exposed the new criminal network in an international forum, presenting irrefutable evidence and mobilizing global public opinion. The pressure was immense and the authorities were forced to act. The final battle was fought not with weapons, but with truth and justice. The network was dismantled, its leaders arrested, and the children rescued. The victory was celebrated around the world, and Sophia Miller became a global icon in the fight for children's rights, honoring her parents' legacy in a way that surpassed all expectations. The Village of Hope continued to flourish, and the Miller Mansion remained an eternal testament to the power of love and resilience. The story of Richard and Anna and their 5 children was not just a tale of the past, but a continuous inspiration for future generations. A reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the light of hope always finds a way to shine, guided by the unwavering strength of family and a love that transcends time. End of story. What an incredible journey, right? From the day Richard showed up unannounced, finding his sons and the woman who would change his life, Anna, to building a legacy of love and justice that echoed for generations, the Miller family showed us that love can spring from the most unexpected places, and that resilience is the greatest strength. Who could have imagined that simple yellow rice would become such a powerful symbol of overcoming adversity, and that the fight against a corrupt network would give rise to a village of hope, turning pain into a beacon of light for so many children? If you were moved, inspired, and connected with every chapter of this saga, don't miss the chance to be part of our community. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our engaging stories. Leave a like on this video to show us you loved the Miller family's journey. Comment below what the most powerful moment was for you and what this story taught you. And of course, share it with your friends and family so more people can be inspired by this powerful narrative. Oh, and don't forget, to your left, you'll find a playlist packed with other incredible stories that will have you hooked from start to finish. Come discover more worlds, more characters, and more emotions. Your next literary adventure is just a click away.